What did you do over shutdown? How did you end up with Turta, first of all?
With Toto?
Yeah, you were on his boat.
Yeah, on his boat.
I did not have Kimi Antonelli doing a whole accent on my bingo card, but I'm really glad I've seen it because it's the funniest thing ever. And I used to actually work with a guy who had an accent like this. He was from Hull, and he'd say, and it'd be like, oh my God, it was very thick. And my parents are also northern, but from the northeast, so it's different. He'd have a field day with my dad's accent. So yeah, I thought it was actually a pretty good attempt for someone with a very thick Italian accent. I don't think he did too bad. I think it's always really funny when you're like in the presence of someone who has a thick northern accent because you always want to try to like imitate them. And I remember I was like with a Dutch guy and tried to get him to do a Geordie accent, and he just basically came out with an Indian accent. He just couldn't do it. So I thought that was a pretty good attempt actually, and very funny. So, welcome back to the Astrological Pit Stop, which is a show where we talk about Formula One and astrology. And this is a pretty spicy episode because a lot happened and a lot of things that were actually pretty accurate. So, I think me going down the list of transits that I did last episode was beneficial because we were a bit more accurate. Sometimes I just rough it and I look at it and go, nah, I think they're going to do okay. I really tapped in this time to get some more accurate predictions. So, the first thing that I accurately predicted, I'm also going to talk about things I got wrong as well, of course. Was Moon Square Uranus for Kimi Antonelli on Friday, and I talked about it being a spin out or mechanical issue. Anything that is squaring opposite or conjunct Uranus for him is a little bit volatile. So on Friday I was sort of, clearly I've got no life. I mean, I was on a client call and I thought, I wonder if he's spun out yet, because I was waiting for the FP1. And then I get online because I didn't see it, and I just see an article that says, oh, and he had this 360 spin and said, I don't know what happened there. And then in the last episode I talked about it being like, I don't really know what happened. Because with Uranus, it's so unexpected. You don't really know what happens. Sometimes it's just out of thin air, right? Like, oh, it's kind of like, you trip over. You don't even know what you tripped over. Like you tripped over your own feet. That's the kind of energy. So Moon Square Uranus had him do a 360 spin, so he pulled over. And then I thought he's going to do it again because the moon was at 14 degrees and his natal Uranus is at 13. So it's really exact square. I thought, oh, it's going to be more volatile this time. And it did. He went to the gravel. And then he said, oh, I just lost the rear very weirdly.
Just lost the rear very weirdly.
So again, when you use the words, oh, I don't know what happened, it's weird, it's unexpected, you know that Uranus is normally in the mix, or Mercury. So that was one thing I accurately predicted. And people were like, oh my God, I might actually start believing. And I think I'm very good at those small little things. It's just if you ask me to give you a podium order, that's normally when I'm wrong. Because I'm just like, I don't know. I've never been good at that. I'm good at sort of telling you, oh, by the way, don't drive here on a Tuesday at 4:44. I'm pretty good at that, more specific stuff. And again, my way of working would be, for example, I'd work with a driver one-on-one. So then I would say Moon Square Uranus is actually going to affect you in this way. I wouldn't be telling you the order of the podium because that's not going to do anything for you. You need to know exactly how to react and what kind of strategy to use. And I think it's really interesting as well because Zandvoort is a track where you can overtake in unsurprising ways. So you could actually pull off some moves that are a bit unexpected. So then, for example, if something is trining Uranus, it would actually be helpful for an overtake in which your opponent is not expecting it. But of course, if you've got a square, you might want to just back off a little bit. And there's a few times this weekend where Kimi was like, it's not worth me pulling out a move to get an extra spot. So that was accurate. Now, I'm on the topic of Kimi, so I might as well just go to him. I've got my little book here of all the things I've wrote about. So I put him that I didn't like him for sprint quali. I was right about that because of the crash into the gravel. It wasn't really a crash, really. It was more just like, went off, didn't he? And then he actually said he had a few holes in the floor, so he did get damage that knocked him down 25 points, apparently. So we had Moon Trine Venus, which was pretty good. Moon Trine Saturn. So again, that's sort of like testing your patience a little bit. I did not like Moon Square Saturn, but I thought it was not major. So again, you might go off with the Moon Square Uranus as well, but it's not something that I would worry too much about. And then I put in my notes, Moon Square Uranus is where I'm worried. That's where I'm thinking, oh, it's a spin out. And of course, it wasn't as bad weather-wise as we expected. I thought it was going to be more stormy, but there were some areas where I'm like, it's going to rain, and there might be some difficulty there. I think also Kimi struggled with his brakes all weekend. For the sprint, we put Moon Trine Mercury is almost exact, which is nice. We have a Mercury return. Now, Mercury return's a strange one because normally that's when you can communicate with ease, but I often find with celebrities or people in the spotlight, they say something a bit bizarre or they're overly emotional. It's when like the pitch in your voice goes up an octave. So a really good example, not that anyone will know him, but some might, is James Charles, the makeup influencer. He came on months ago during his Mercury return in Taurus, which means he doubled down and was really stubborn about it. He basically was like, oh my God, this girl came into my DMs and she's asking for a handout. Get a freaking job. And his voice went so high. He was like, get a freaking job. And Kimi was also on the radio, angry at Alex Albon. And he was like, what the fuck? And really high pitched. I didn't think it was him. I was like, that's got to be AI. But he was so annoyed. His voice went up like 5 octaves to the point where I'm like, have we gone back in time 5 years ago or something? What's going on with the girly voice? So Mercury return can sometimes get you like that, especially when it's in Leo because it's hot-headed and it's like, don't mess with me. So that's also something to consider. We had Sun conjunct Mercury, which I think is nice. What I did not like in the sprint was Moon square Moon because it does not bring the glory that we're looking for, and it's also very frustrated. So it's like an issue that you brought from sprint quali. So in the sprint, he did not do as well as we thought he was going to. I thought he would do better. But yeah, Moon square Moon can be quite difficult. And then for quali, I said it would be in a similar vein, but a little bit better. And he was better, but still not amazing. Still not where I think we're expecting him to be after the past couple of weeks, I should add. For the race, I actually had him as the winner for the race, but he was P2 instead. Close enough, I guess. So I actually predicted the drivers accurately for the podium, but just in the wrong order. So for the race, I thought he was going to be P1 because you have Moon trine Sun, which is really good for emotions and ambitions together. And then Mars trine Uranus, which is like supernatural reflexes and reacting to things in the moment, you know, with really good capacity. So I thought all that together would be, you know, quite victorious, but I think it was a strange weekend for him. Sometimes really good, sometimes not. Again, I really thought towards the start of the weekend we would not be as good because of the Moon square Uranus, which I think I was correct in saying. I thought it would pick up a little bit from the sprint to the race. And again, P2 is nothing to sniff at. You know, it's a podium. P2 is pretty good, and I'll take it. You know, he didn't crash. You notice he didn't have any sort of diabolical moments after the Moon square Uranus. As soon as we got to the sprint, I knew that we'd be okay because the moon had completely passed a square with his Uranus. It was at 24 degrees, so too far out. So I thought, possibly, it's always possible, but I'm not worried like I was on Friday where I woke up with a sixth sense, like he's going to spin out. And then I did a video on TikTok and I was like, am I not Nostradamus, you know? Also, I hate that video because I came across really arrogant and cocky and I was like, I didn't mean to be like, oh my God, you crashed. Like, I don't want him to crash. But I was just happy that I got something so specifically accurate. So I fear I came across like a bitch, but I didn't mean to. Okay, so I predicted Kimi as a P2 for sprint, which was wrong. He actually got P4. And then I predicted him as P1 for the race, which was wrong, going for P2. So I was not correct in some of the things. But again, I'm really looking at the dynamics. That's what we're trying to do here. It's not for me to say you're always going to be P1. It's for the dynamics. And I was a bit sort of worried because this is the first time I've actually done a podium order. And my dad was like, I know you're probably scared, but you should still do it because, you know, why not? So let's move on to George. I actually predicted George to have a podium for race, and he did. He had a P3, so I'm very happy with that. So let's actually go through George's weekend because it's pretty good. So for sprint quali, I had the Moon square the nodes, which I think was overcorrecting the car and maybe struggling with grip. Moon square Mars, which I didn't like because it felt frustrating. But we did have Moon trine Saturn, which means he's overcoming those boundaries at the moment. Moon sextile Uranus, which again is like unexpected, not necessarily victory because the sextile's not that powerful, but it certainly feels like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. I think actually Moon sextile Uranus works really well with a sprint because you only get a couple of points and it's not the race, but gives you a bit of pep in the step. Mars trine Chiron, overcoming that trauma from the first half of the season, and Mars trining Jupiter as well, which I really liked. Moon Square Moon did not like, similar for Kimi, who had that in the sprint. So George got P1 in the sprint, which was really amazing. Well done to him. I did not predict him to be in the podium for the sprint because I just thought that Moon Square Moon and Moon Square Mars would be more difficult for frustration. But if I sat back like we're doing now, looking at data, the Moon Sextile Uranus should have given it away that it was probably going to be better than we expected. For the sprint, we've got Moon Square Mars again still, but, you know, alters a little bit. I did not like Venus opposite Saturn because I think that can be kind of giving up your own victory for some kind of constriction. It kind of gives penalty, but actually we were okay. For qualifying, I put it was a sort of similar energy, and yeah, he was still on the podium for the qualifying round. So George actually ended up being P3 for the race. Quite contentious one, this, as a Mercedes fan. I wasn't actually watching the race because I was out doing something. And I was with a friend and I was like she was like, you can put that damn phone down. I was like, the drama. So yeah, it's kind of interesting because team orders came into play. And I'm going to talk more at length about this in a new video that I'm going to come out with probably in a week or so, which we really need to talk about this justice energy that Kimi and Lando are going into because it really reeks of energy from last year. I also really want to start covering Max Verstappen's energy next year because we ain't ready for that, I'm telling you. 2021, play it back. So that's going to be intriguing. So for George, for the race, we've got Moon Trine Moon. I think it's really good. We have Moon Trine the nose, which is much better for grip and having more mastery over the car. And then the thing I didn't like was Mercury opposite the Sun exact. That's like communication that hinders your ambition. Well, actually that makes sense. So what happened was Lando's leading and Kimi had been told to go ahead of George. So George had to step back a bit to switch positions. So this was a team order. But unfortunately that left George to the wolves. And by wolves I mean Ferrari. So, you know, he just went, hey, deal with Lewis Hamilton. Great, just throw me to the devil's mouth, why don't you? And then basically George, in my opinion, protected Kimi actually to have P2. And I think in a way, you know, he came out and said like it was the right thing to do, but a lot of people are gaining sympathy for George now, which is really intriguing because, you know, I feel that he's a team player and yes, maybe he wants to win like every driver, but I think he was pretty selfless in this race. And I think people probably don't realise how much he probably did defend Lewis Hamilton and protect Kimi. And, you know, Toto came on the radio and said, like, I didn't think you could do that. Which, again, is like, you're always like underestimating him. Like, what do you mean you didn't think he could defend? So you admit that you just throw him to the wolves then. You admit you just thought, just get him out of Kimi's way so he can protect. Like, that's exactly what happened. And George said, no. Why are we doing, you know, he's the knight and she's the queen type of thing? Why are we trying to do that? I don't like that. I don't like that. So I think George did a fantastic job and a well-deserved podium. And I'm really glad to see him get his pep and step back. Now he's tied with Lewis Hamilton for P2. This is going to be interesting as well because I talked about Lewis Hamilton retaining P2, but will that actually be a thing? I don't know. Again, this is why we kind of reassess it, especially when we get the Venus and Mercury retrograde. That's going to be like something out of Blade Trinity. So that was quite intriguing. Okay, so let's look at Lando Norris. I'm really glad that I put him in my top 3 because he did very well this weekend. So I did think he would do slightly better in the race than the sprint. And that's because of a lunar and Venus return, but I'll come to talk about that. So for the sprint, I had Mars square Venus, which I don't like so much, but we did have Moon trine Mercury and the Sun, which I really do like. And that's because the Moon is basically supporting communication and ambition. So this is really positive for a podium. Of course, Lando actually got P3 in the sprint. For qualifying, we have Moon trine Jupiter, and I thought this was very similar to the sprint in that it could be quite victorious. I didn't necessarily have him as pole position, but I, again, still think he was in sort of my top 3. And for the race, it's quite interesting because we have a lunar return. So we have the Moon in Capricorn conjunct Lando's natal Moon. And whenever he has this type of transit, he tends to do quite well, which I mentioned in my video. And so I think that was quite obvious that he was going to do well. We also have a nice Venus return in Libra. And I said he would be quite steady, but maybe doesn't have the pace. I think I was quite wrong with that. I think he definitely had the pace. He was steady and, quick. Really great driving from Lando. Really, very good. He's done some really good races this year. I think he's definitely proving why he's a champion, for sure. I'm not particularly a Lando fan by any means. I don't know him very well, but I think he seems to be fairly chilled out this season, and it shows. So he did very well. We've got him as P3 for the sprint and, of course, P1 for the race. Oscar, I'm not going to go through all his transits. Basically, I said he was neither here nor there. I put him like 4th, 5th, 6th kind of thing. So I was pretty accurate on that one. Well, another thing I was very accurate with was Max. I said he was going to have a horrific weekend, and everyone was like, nah, this is his home race, it's wet weather, he's going to absolutely dominate. And I said, no, because you're not looking at astrology. And I was very, strong in my conviction with that, to much chagrin. So I said sprint quali, Moon Trine Saturn was probably the only thing I liked about that. But, and again, it's no disrespect to Max at all. I'm really sad that he did crash out his home race, but you couldn't have spotted him in an empty room, you know what I mean? He's just nowhere. I thought the chart was horrific. Also apparently had the flu as well, so that shows a lot of squares. He just wasn't feeling very well. For the sprint, I had Moon Square Moon, don't like that. Moon Square Mercury, horrific. Moon Square Sun, even more horrific. So again, Moon Square South Node as well, talking about grip issues, didn't like that. He also spun out in FP1 as well. So no, I did not like him for that. For qualifying, exact Moon Square Mercury, I put radio miscommunication, just generally, Jupiter opposite Jupiter, it ain't happening. And then for the race, the one thing I was like, this is disappointing, and I actually said in my own words, this is a disappointing last race, and I've written here, probably can't see, but I also mentioned it in the video, Moon Square Sun plus MC. So when the moon is squaring the sun, ambition is kind of hilted. This is basically disappointment. This is like if someone said, I don't actually fancy you, I'm sorry. And you're like, thanks for that. And then plus your midheaven, which is what you're known for and what you're talented at, it's a bit destroyed. It's soul destroying at your home race. So I saw that and thought, look, it ain't happening. And I did have doubts because I thought, do you know what? Max is one of those drivers that will pull it out the bag. But I just felt it's not happening. And then when I was with my friend, I just went and had a quick look and went, oh my God, he's crashed. And I just knew it wasn't going to be a weekend for him. I'm not happy about it, of course. It's not nice for him. But I was pretty strong in my conviction. And I know people would say, you're wrong because Max is Max. But astrology doesn't lie. And especially if he's not feeling very well. A lot of those squares, like the Mars square the sun, because Mars is the physical body. When you have squares to Mars as well, which was the chart rule of the track, sometimes you just don't feel very well. So, not good. So that was an accurate prediction. The next one was Charles. I really liked Charles for this weekend. I thought he was going to do a lot better than we expected. Now, this is one where I'm like, can I get this or not? I said I thought he was going to do fantastic in sprint quali and the sprint because we have Moon Trine Saturn, Mercury Trine the Moon. We have Moon Trine Moon for the actual sprint race, Moon Sextile. Everything was just beautiful, right? So he got P2 in the sprint. So I predicted P1, he got P2. I'll take it, right? And then for qualifying, I was like, yeah, very similar to sprint. No, I don't think he did that well, really, in that regard. And then for the race, I actually said the only thing I liked was Uranus trying Uranus, but I couldn't see anything obvious. I couldn't see anything where I was like, it's victorious, but it's also a failure. And I think he was kind of just in the middle, wasn't he? So I don't know if you can see, but I put, can't see anything. I can't see anything crazy. I was like, but I was happy about it because I was like, well, I think his sprint would be really nice. And I put in my own words, I think he'd better in the sprint than we expect. And I think P2 is probably, I'll take it, right? But yeah, the race, I was like, again, a bit like Max, like I was saying, just couldn't spot him in an empty room, just sort of there. And unfortunately, he did his thing as always. And again, I like Charles, so this is no shade, but it is becoming apparent that he fights with his own teammate, and this is the problem. And he held Lewis back, and Lewis was very angry about this. And I think it's becoming very clear that is in a subconscious way, whether we know it or not, Charles does not want Lewis to win in Ferrari before him. I wouldn't want to either. If I was like the golden boy, why would you? I'm not that evolved. I don't think he's that evolved, right? But you are actually hindering the points for the team. And it's so important when George and Lewis are literally together with the same points that 1 point, even one, can really change things. So when Lewis came out and said, you know, I want to win, and it's these 1 or 2 points that really make the difference. And he's actually said in his own words, I want to lead this team to victory. He didn't say, I want us to. He said, I want to lead it, right? So I do think it's Charles. I mean, Lando's above Charles now in the leaderboard. So I felt it was a bit of an odd decision, but there you go. So I think I was correct in him doing better in the sprint, but he didn't get P1. Again, splitting hairs maybe. For Lewis, interesting up and down weekend I had predicted for him for sprint quali at Moon conjunct Uranus. I actually put yikes. I think it was more of a, this is just not what you want. I mean, what did he end up getting? Like 7th or something? It was like, where is he? We also have Moon square Mars. Don't like that. I felt like I did put maybe as a possibility for a penalty because I'm like, why does it seem so slow? But I think he just generally got caught up in the melee of it all. For sprint, I thought he would do slightly better with Moon exactly conjunct Mercury and Mars trine Mercury. I think he was just sort of on a similar sort of ground, wasn't he? And then qualifying is where I thought this would be a little bit better. So he did do it a little bit better than the sprint. And then for the race, I said Moon conjunct Neptune might cause us some issues. So again, the Moon is the emotions and feelings. When it is conjunct Neptune, which is all about illusion, you can get very frustrated. And I said it was going to be sort of lazy, delayed, slow reflexes, or basically just not getting the job done the way you want to. But again, we could also see Neptune as being something that pulls back. So you could also see that Charles perhaps pulled him back a little bit. Again, it's one of those things to look at on reflection. So let's look at the leaderboard. So I pretty much accurately predict the podium, but in the wrong order, give and take a few things. So the actual results for the sprint were P1 George, P2 for Charles, P3 for Lando, P4 for Kimi. I predicted P1 for Charles, P2 for Kimi, P3 for Lando. I'll take that. For the race, the actual results were P1 Lando, P2 Kimi, P3 George, P4 for Lewis, and P5 for Charles. I predicted P1 for Kimi, P2 George, P3 Lando. So, yeah, I think it was pretty accurate, actually. Again, I'm not very good with the order of these things, but fairly interesting. So, the next race is Monza. This is going to be a really fun one, a bit of a bloodbath, actually, because, of course, Kimi's taken his engine penalty here. I'm really happy he's done so because the first episode I did for this podcast was called Why Kimi must actually take his engine penalty in Monza because the astrology is suited for it. And if we're looking at it from a strategic point of view, we really want to be as fast as possible. And like I called him the ghost of Monza because he's going to be like a ghost, go all the way through the track. To go from 22 to podium could be generational at your home race. Fascinating. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it because of Mars in Cancer, but we'll have to look at the chart a bit more accurately as we get closer to the time. I think it's definitely going to be those races where Lando and George can really mount a comeback, and of course it's going to be an absolute Dracula blood fight for Lewis. So I think it's going to be really fun to watch, actually, and it's always going to be exciting to see the Ferrari fans come out in full force too. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.